Hello and welcome everyone to our TOK webinar with Robin Press. I'll just give it a minute whilst everyone's joining. It's nice to see you, and if you could drop in the chat where you're joining from today. Whilst we're waiting, we'll go over the house rules. Everyone's cameras and microphones are disabled just to reduce any disruptions. If you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A and we will get to them at the Q&A session at the end. And if you need to ask anything, just drop anything in the chat as well. And it is being recorded, so you will receive an email with a link to the recording and the slides after the webinar in the next 48 hours. So I would like to get started by introducing our presenter today, Robin Press. She is a TOK expert and co-creator of Pearson's TOK Exhibition game with Sue Bastian. So Robin, what is your background?
Well, I started teaching IB Visual Arts, taught that for several years, I still do. And I've been teaching theory of knowledge for going on 20 years. I've been through several guide changes. I moderate the exhibition task, and Sue and I created this game, the exhibition game, which I'm really excited about. Yeah, and that's me.
Sounds like you're very knowledgeable in TOK. So how long have you been teaching TOK?
About 20 years. In fact, I met Sue many years ago. She originally was a workshop leader in a workshop I took to learn to teach TOK. And after that, we became friends and collaborators. When the new guide came out, First Exams 2022, we were really inspired by the exhibition task. For those who are here that have taught theory of knowledge for a while, it's one of the biggest and I would say best changes that happened to the course in quite a while. We were very excited about the task, and we thought it really lent itself well to a game that would be a teaching and learning tool, specifically to prepare kids for the task.
That all sounds really exciting and great. So how did the idea of the game come about?
Well, to be honest, Sue had the idea of making a game for TOK for a long time, but we didn't really know, we couldn't really find the right fit until the new exhibition AI was introduced, and then it just lent itself so perfectly well. And we really wanted something that you could touch. It was around the time of COVID. Everybody was on screens all the time. And there was something really exciting about working in the classroom with students with something that they could actually touch. And so we started with a prototype. I used it in my classroom and some other colleagues. And it was just, the kids had such a great time playing, and we felt like it was really excellent way to prepare them for an assessment task and to sort of demystify it, make it less scary. And I think that's something that it does do.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it definitely seems like it makes everything less scary. So I'll hand over to you now, and it's over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. First, I'll just talk about what we're going to do in the next 40 or 50 minutes. We're going to talk a little bit about learning by doing. And then I'm going to talk really briefly about the task itself, the exhibition task. I'm going to concentrate a little on real world context, which is something that I know a lot of teachers have questions about and have concerns about. Then we're going to watch a demonstration of the game being played, and you'll have a chance to try scoring the team that is presenting in the demonstration, and then we'll have our Q&A session. So pretty much that's what we're going to be doing, and I'm going to jump right into it. So this is a picture of some of my colleagues playing the game at a faculty meeting. I really think it's important for all subject teachers to be aware of TOK, to embrace TOK, and to incorporate it in their way that they're working in their classrooms. We had a great time playing the game in this faculty meeting. You'll see some images of them throughout the slideshow. And I think that this also, and we'll get into it a little more later, is another great way to use the game as a professional development tool. Okay, so learning by doing. I'm going to play a short audio by Sebastian, my co-author of the game, and it speaks for itself. So I'll let Sue speak.
The game is the exhibition game, TOK in the world, and it's different in that they're not just writing an essay about a TOK question, they're looking in the world for the way TOK is present, really everywhere, knowledge issues everywhere. How do I know this? How do I know that? Should I believe this? What is true? And so forth. Well, how do you get that down to earth so that teachers and students can really deal with it? Because that's the way the assessment goes. So I said, okay, let's make it a game. Let's make it a learning by doing. And if the teachers can then learn it, because it's a professional development game as well as for the students, then they can teach it. And if they can do the game well and learn it, they can teach it well. And then the students can do the same when it comes to their doing it.
Okay. So that's Sue. I would be interested in knowing about learning by doing in your classrooms. And so if it sort of made something jump to mind about something you do in your classroom, TOK, or another subject that you teach, if you could pop it in the chat, that would be great. It's great to see how other teachers are using sort of very tangible experiences with students. And I think in TOK, it's certainly applicable. My students do all sorts of things with art and video and writing, and they're really learning through that the kind of concepts that we want them to be able to get their head around in a way that makes much more sense to them than just sort of abstract ideas. And actually that's what the TOK task is really about. Okay, so as you know, the underlying question that the IB guide has specified for the exhibition is, does the exhibition successfully show how TOK manifests in the world around us? And so I've given a lot of thought to the word manifests, and I think the best way to think about it is, does the exhibition demonstrate how students experience TOK in their lives, in their surroundings? That's what we're going for. Now, that's not to say, and we'll talk about this a bit later, that the objects that they select for their exhibition have to be personal objects per se, but to make those kind of connections between TOK ideas and the real world is the goal. Okay, so let's move on. One of the main requirements, one of the main expectations of the IA task is to provide 3 objects and identify a real world context for those objects. Okay, I know you can read the slide, but I'm going to read it. This is from the subject guide. Specific objects that have a specific real world context objects that exist in a particular time and place. They can be tangible physical objects or they can be digital objects, but they're meant to exist in a specific time and place. Now, I see in my work as an examiner that there still are some students who struggle with the idea of identifying objects with a real world context. And I would go further than that and say a real world context that is relevant to what they are discussing in their commentary. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of a hypothetical real world context. Why? Because in our game, one of the limitations is because there are a finite number of cards, we can't possibly have cards where every single student will have a real world context for every single object. So in the game, unlike in the IA task, students will be making up a hypothetical real world context. One of the things that I think is important is that it be a feasible hypothetical real world context, a realistic one. This is one of the ways, and there are several, and I'll point them out as we speak today. This is one of the ways where the game, and I want to stress this, is not the IA task. Rather, it's a tool to prepare students for the IA task. And it's important that kids understand that. For the game, they'll be playing in teams. For the IA task, they'll be working alone. For the game, they'll be choosing 3 objects that have a real world context. For the IA, and for the game, they'll be providing hypothetical real world context. So this is one of the example cards that comes inside the game. And this first one, a pine cone I found a few years ago, is a possible real world context that a team could provide. They might say, I always loved it because it's so beautiful. I later learned about the golden ratio, and then I understood that it wasn't by chance that I thought that this object was so beautiful. So I might use this object for the prompt, how important are material tools in the production or acquisition of knowledge, because seeing this pine cone made me able to understand, for example, the golden ratio. Another possible context below, an image from my math textbook when our teacher explained the Fibonacci sequence. Here's another example that comes in the pack of cards. This Monet painting, an image that my IB visual arts teacher used to teach us about one-point perspective. Now, it's possible that an additional real-world context in this case could just be that it's a painting by Claude Monet, the year that it was painted, and the title of the painting. That is a real-world context, even if the student doesn't have a personal connection. So I just want to make that clear. Okay, one more. This could be an x-ray of my hand after I was injured in football practice last year. Okay, this could talk about, it could relate to a prompt about, are some types of knowledge more useful than others? It could relate to a prompt about, are some types of knowledge more open to interpretation than others? It could relate to any number of the prompts on the list, okay? But now in the chat, I'd like you to come up with a hypothetical real world context, another option for this object. And see what you can come up with. Something feasible, something realistic. So on the screen, you see the 3 cards that the students in the demonstration, that the team in the demonstration chose. And a summary of the main points of what they said in their demonstration. The cultural appropriation, I realized that although it was spoken about at the end, not everything that they discussed was in the video, because we didn't want to make it too long. So it is here, and she said it at the end. What I want you to do is take a good look at these points that they hit upon and think about the demonstration that they did. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the scorecard that comes with the game. This is another area where the game is not the same as the IA task. Okay, so I want to be clear about that. As you know, the IA task is graded out of 10, and it's global impression marking. It is holistic marking. But these are really the three aspects that we're looking at when we're looking for best fit in the global impression marking. So for the purposes of the game, we decided to have the game scored out of 30 points, 10 for each of these aspects. So when you're thinking about the demonstration you saw, consider, did they identify specific real-world context for each object? What do they deserve out of 10 for that? Did they make clear links between the objects and the prompt? And did they justify the contribution of each of the objects to the prompt? Meaning, were each of the objects contributing something different to the discussion of the prompt? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes now, and I'd like you to try to apply these three aspects to the demonstration you saw, to the little exhibition that they presented, and let's see what we come up with in the chat. And Jemima, you can see the chat, is that right? I can't see the chat.
Yes, I can see the chat.
Yeah. So maybe as numbers start to go up, you can tell us what we're seeing.
So far we've had one person say 8.
8 out of 30? Is that 8 out of 30? I know you don't know. What you want to do is put something in the chat that's out of 30. Okay, 10 for each of these aspects.
So then we've had another one for real world context 6, link 8, and justification 8 with a total of 22.
Okay.
We've had 877. We've had
Also 22. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've had a 15 out of 30.
Okay.
We've had a total of 24.
Mm-hmm.
And then another one that's 988 of the total of 25.
Okay.
Then a few more 20s and 21s. So
Okay.
all around that sort of range.
Okay, so let's take a look at it. I'm just gonna go back for a sec and we'll take a peek, okay? I think that somewhere around the mid-20s, 22, 24, 20, I mean, it's not a science and it's a game. So what would happen in your classroom probably is that the students would grade themselves and or each other. That's the idea. I think they did pretty well providing a real world context for the recipe and for the Bible. With pie, it was a bit vague, and that's a tough one. If the student had said that it was a diagram in the exact textbook that he had learned it from and talked specifically about that day and that lesson, that would have given it a more clear real world context. But other than that, I think that they spoke about real world context in a way that was relevant to then the points that they made. I think that, again, there was quite a limited amount of time. You saw a 2.5 minute or 3.5 minute video. And when you play this in your classroom, it takes about 50 minutes. That's what we would estimate. So I think that somewhere around the mid-20s is probably a good fit for what we saw. But again, it's really more to get, it's also to win the game, of course. They're excited about winning when they're competing, but it's really more about getting their head around what the criteria are looking for the IA. Okay, so here we are again. Okay. So I spoke earlier about the game as professional development. I do use it with teachers, and this is Marilyn Sinclair, who's a very experienced TOK teacher, examiner, and workshop leader, and she's used it quite a lot in workshops training TOK teachers. So we're just going to give her a minute of our time.
I'm Marilyn Sinclair, TOK workshop leader, teacher, examiner. And I want to tell you that teachers really love the exhibition game. We play it in all my workshops, and immediately teachers want to know how they can get their hands on their own copy and use it in their own classrooms. Why is it so successful? Well, firstly, it's fun. It's lively. Students get to discuss their ideas. They listen to each other. It's collaborative. The groups become teams because they're aiming for a common goal. And there are roles for everyone. Everyone's contributions matter. Teachers realize that this is a great way to prepare students for the exhibition assessment. As an examiner, I see how it helps students meet the challenges of the exhibition. First, they learn to dissect the prompt until they fully appreciate its meaning and its potential. Second, they learn to focus on a specific object, thinking of it as a knowledge artifact and appreciating it for its singular attributes. Third, they practice how to be concise and convincing because their explanation has to show how the prompt and the object are speaking to each other. I'm a big proponent of gamifying learning skills. The exhibition game is a tool that works.
Okay. And here we are, Q&A. So I am going to, I think Catherine Barber's going to join us. And ask me some questions.
Yeah, so just to introduce me, I am the publisher here at Pearson for the IB portfolio, and I worked with Robin and Sue to publish the game. So we've had a couple of questions that came in during the webinar, and please do continue to submit your questions as we're talking. But we also had some that came in ahead of the webinar. So I think there were quite a lot of questions related to objects, and I think we'll start with those. So somebody ahead of the webinar asked, does having limited objects in the game limit students' imagination in choosing them for their task?
Okay, so I mean, I can only really speak from my experience, and no, I've been using the game first the prototype, which had fewer objects than the full game, and then the game for several years already. I haven't found that students have gravitated toward objects that are pictured in the game. I haven't found it to have, no, I haven't found it to have any problem in terms, in fact, in maybe the opposite, because within the game there are several sentences, words, there's a fairly wide range of types of objects that gets them thinking in that way. So I don't think that's a problem.
You? How do I ensure students are making links with real-world context for their objects?
Well, I mean, this is one of the things where I would say the more practice, the better. Okay. Even leaving the game on the side. Okay. What I think we all should be doing in the classroom, now that we know that this is one of the assessment tasks. The assessment task is there to assess whether or not they're making the links that we want them to make from learning theory of knowledge. So I know that I am a big proponent of stories in the classroom. I tell stories about things that have happened to me, which make me think about theory of knowledge. Students bring things in from the newspaper, and they're constantly making connections between theory of knowledge and the real world. That's what you want to go for from day one, really. And if you do that, then the game is sort of just that idea in physical form. And ultimately, those are the kinds of questions you want them to be asking when they're watching the news or looking at an ad or TikTok or whatever it is they're watching. We want them to be asking questions about things that are in their worlds. And so the more we can make connections with things that are interesting to them, are relevant to them, throughout the 2 years, the more ready they are going to be to take on the task.
Are there any objects that you would not recommend?
Yeah. There are actually two kinds of objects that I would beware of. Okay, so one kind of object I would beware of is an object like this. Now, this would be fine if I wanted to make a link to say, are some types of knowledge more useful than others? And I talk about getting my driver's license, and suddenly these are my keys, and so on and so forth. And I'm giving these keys a real world context. These keys exist in the world. However, if I were to say, these are keys and they symbolize the keys to knowledge, if I'm using the keys in a metaphorical way, that's something to be avoided, okay? This is where the whole real world context comes into play. So that's one kind of object that I would have students beware of. Another thing, and this is less of beware and more of clarify. Okay, so this is one of the images in the game, for example. Now, if the student were to choose this image, this card, they would have to make it clear if the object that they're talking about is, say, the backpack that he's wearing, okay, or the person, or the image. This is quite a controversial image. Were men really walking on the moon? And if they're choosing the photo as their object, that's absolutely fine, but they need to make that clear. So those are two things that I would say. And the third thing is, and students, I mean, if you read the subject report from last year, students are constantly using, Bible is a really popular one, their iPhone, super popular. It's actually fine for them to use these kind of not very creative objects, because it doesn't say anywhere in the rubric that the object has to be original or groundbreaking, okay? However, they do have to provide a real world context, and that real world context should be relevant. So just saying this is my iPhone and then just talking about iPhones in general, they're not fulfilling what they need to be fulfilling. But if they're looking at a question like, to what extent does our knowledge depend on interaction with other knowers, for example, and then they talk about doing an online course on their iPhone, then their iPhone might be an acceptable and even a good object. So I hope that's clear.
And kind of to follow up from that, so Özlem said that many objects seem generic. Do you want to comment any further on that?
No, not really. I mean, I think any object that you photograph and put on a card can suddenly seem generic, I suppose. We tried to get a good mix of objects that were culturally specific and significant, and objects that were connected with science and technology, objects that were connected with knowledge and language, sort of all the optional themes.
Thank you. So Matt has asked, is there an issue with dealing with cliches in the game? I tend to attempt to lead my students away from the Bible, electron microscope, Galileo's telescope, etc.
Well, I think it's just what I just said. I mean, I think that actually the game is a good opportunity to reinforce what you're saying. Okay, choosing the Bible. I mean, again, as an examiner, I can tell you a lot of students choose the Bible, but that doesn't mean that they don't write excellent commentaries about the Bible. So I caution my students, and I think that there are some of the images in the game that are less specific and some that are more specific. But I think that that's the way they relate in the world as when they're doing the IA as well. So I think it's a good opportunity to reinforce that, actually.
And then Matthew has said, in your experience, do you have students who simply default to wanting to use the objects represented in the cards in their actual exhibition? For example, he sees the thinker pictured on the screen. Do you have students who will just say, oh, I'll use that in my exhibition?
No.
Okay, that was quick. In adding personal connection when describing the object, do you think that improves the quality and grade of the exhibition, the game, or the exhibition, like the proper exhibition?
Well, the game, it's hard to say. I mean, the game, the proper IA, I think, no. And I think that not necessarily, let's put it this way. I think not necessarily. I think that teachers tend to think, and I think the subject report even says this, that teachers tend to think and tend to grade higher when it's a personal object of the students. But in fact, that's not a requirement in any way. The thing is that sometimes, and this goes back to the person who just asked about cliche, I think that sometimes when they're using an object which is personal to them, they can make a more authentic link. But if they can manage to make an authentic link using the thinker, then that's fine. So I don't think that it's necessarily better, but I think that in my experience, I might recommend it to students because they tend to be more thoughtful.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in the video of your students playing the game, they picked pi as one of the objects, and Stephanie asked, how would pi work as an object as it doesn't exist in a particular place and time?
Well, I think that they could have said, there are probably some math teachers out there, and I don't know. They could have said, "This is pi, a symbol that was identified, invented in such and such a year." That would give it a real world context, actually. Or they could have said, and in fact, what I wish that student had said was, "This is a picture of pi that was in my 6th grade math book." That is fine because there probably is a picture of pi in a 6th grade math textbook. So that gives it a real world context. So either of those work.
Great, thank you. There's lots of questions coming in about objects. So
Sure.
Nathan asked, how far away do you think the object can be from the point? So in the Bible example from the video, it was used by the student to link the printing press, which then linked to the dissemination of knowledge. This seems like a number of steps to reach the point, and is that ever a problem when linking the object to the prompt?
I need to think about that. I mean, I agree. In a way, they also talked in the video I'm talking about, they also talked about different denominations, so different analyses of the Bible. But one of the students talked about the printing press in terms of disseminating knowledge and growing the community of knowers. I think that fewer steps is better. I suppose that's, can you repeat the question, how it's worded?
It seems like a number of steps to reach the prompt. Is that ever a problem for linking the object to the prompt?
Well, it's not a problem, but I mean, when we're looking at I'm going to talk about it in terms of the IA now, as opposed to the game. Okay, in terms of the IA, if we're looking at the excellent markband descriptor, it says links between each of the 3 objects in the selected IA prompt are clearly made and well explained, and supported by appropriate evidence. So arguably, in this case, say, if this were for the IA, what that student said about the printing press could be actually about evidence of that when the printing press was invented, knowledge was disseminated, and the community of knowers grew. If I were marking it as an IA, I suppose I'd look at it that way. So the answer is, you want everything that they're writing in their commentary to be relevant because they have a maximum word count. But when they're playing the game, there's a lot more flexibility because they don't have a maximum word count. And the idea is to get them thinking in a way that's going to help them to succeed on the IA. So I hope that answers.
Thank you, Robin. There's a couple of questions here related to TOK specific terminology, so I'll read them both out because I think they are linked. So firstly, is there a mechanism in the game to stimulate students to use TOK specific terminology, most specifically the TOK concepts? And how can this game be used to help students create strong links to the prompt and object? Is there an emphasis on using TOK concepts through the game?
Well, I mean, it's not, first of all, I think that the TOK concepts are fairly incorporated in the prompts, and the game is using the same 35 prompts that are on the list that they're choosing for their IA. So there, the word evidence, the word, I'm just looking, justification, the word pursuit of knowledge, ethical issues connected with knowledge, production, acquisition of knowledge, and so on. They're in the prompts. So I think that because in the game, as in the IA, in this case, they are parallel in the way that referring back to the prompt is a good practice. Using the language of the prompt and the idea of TOK thinking is what we're looking for. So I think, but it's not written in the score sheet or anything of that nature. But again, this is the kind of thing that for sure you can encourage when you introduce the game to students, because there is a lot of leeway for, say, the first time that I use the game in my classroom, maybe we're not even playing the game, maybe I'm just showing them an image, it's rather close to the beginning of the course, and we start talking about it, all of us together, and looking at lists of knowledge questions and thinking about what knowledge issues, what TOK issues we can connect to, for example, this guy, you know. But what was the second question, Catherine? Sorry, I'm going on.
So is there an emphasis on using TOK concepts through the game? And how can the game be used to help students create strong links to the prompt and the objects?
There you go. Yeah, so I mean, I think that the way it can help make strong links to the object is by playing the game and being scored according to the scorecard by their peers and by themselves. You may decide, depending on the atmosphere in your own classroom and within your own cohort, to have students do a round where nothing counts, where everyone's playing together, where they're self-assessing based on the scorecard and seeing if they think that the links they're making are authentic. I find they're pretty honest, and they tend to assess themselves more harshly than we do, actually. So I think that the more they get used to thinking in those terms, the easier it will be for them to read the rubric, because when it's a scorecard, it's much less scary than when it's a rubric somehow.
Yeah. What age group can these kinds of questions be asked? So I guess can you start introducing TOK questions before students get to DP?
Yeah, I mean, you can. Look, there are also TOK questions, knowledge questions in each of the units, which these are the prescribed questions for for the IA task. But if you look in the TOK guide, like in the knowledge and the knower section, in the knowledge and language section, knowledge and politics, and so on, there are lists for all of them. And in all of the AOKs, in all of the areas of knowledge, there are also knowledge questions. So one of the things I would encourage is that those knowledge questions, I'll tell you something I did once, which was really fun, that those knowledge questions be used also in subject classrooms, because we do want to get them thinking, and there's no reason that it has to be that they don't start thinking in this way until DP. In fact, on the contrary, the earlier the better. I once did a session with some teachers and CAS coordinators, and it was an online thing, and people were coming up with objects that connected to their particular discipline that they were teaching. So in the biology lab, or objects that were connected to CAS experiences. And this was for faculty training. And I think that it was a really good way for them to start to think about how they could introduce knowledge questions in everything that they're doing. Certainly in the visual arts classroom, I can say that the knowledge questions that we use in theory of knowledge, so many of them are such a good fit. And I'm sure it's true for science and for math and for languages and so on. So I would say it's never too early.
Great. There's been a few questions coming in about kind of practicalities of using it in class, so I'll come to them in a second. But firstly, Matteo asked, do you recommend beginning the IA from the prompt, both in the game and in the assessment itself?
Well, you know, this is an open question, and the IA guide and the teacher support material is very clear that there isn't a right answer to this question. So I would say that if the student has an object that they really want to use, sometimes you get a student that just the moment they start to learn about the IA, they already have an object in mind. And if that's the case, then that's great. Then they can start from the object and look at the prompts. I think, I could be wrong, but I think that more typically my students tend to start from the prompt, but it's absolutely fine either way. In terms of the game, the prompt they pick from the pile of questions at the beginning. So they definitely start from the prompt. Okay, the way the game works, we didn't really go through the instructions as they're written, but the way the game works is they would choose the card from the deck. All the teams turn over their card at the same time, and then they talk about the question for a few minutes, and at the same time, one representative of each team would go up and choose an image, and they have 5 minutes with that image, and then they go up and choose a second image, and they have 5 minutes with that image, and so on. And so they definitely start from the prompt. In the IA, it's less important, but I think unofficially that more typically I've seen students start from the prompt, but it's absolutely fine either way.
Perfect. So just to confirm for people that are asking about the game itself, there are 52 object cards and 35 prompts in the game box.
That is correct. And a score sheet.
And a score sheet.
And this little instruction card. And I would say the little instruction card, and it has the instructions, which I started to say, but there you may find that you want to switch up how you play it, and there are so many ways you can use it, really, I think.
Yeah, and related to that, Ron asked, how many students would you assign to a group, and how many groups can be accommodated with one box of the game?
I would say that, I would say that 3, 4 students is a good size group. 5 is okay. After that, it's too large. I like 3 and 4. I think that you could accommodate about 5 groups. I think a class of 20, one pack is good. Once your class starts getting larger than that, maybe a class of 25 even. I'm just trying to think, because when I did it with faculty, we were around 40 people, and I did use 2 packs of cards, but there were tons of cards left over. So yeah, I think that's about right. Let's say up to about 25.
There's a follow-up question from something that we discussed earlier. So Duke asked, someone asked this directly before, but is there an issue if a student later on decides to pick an object that closely resembles what is on the cards for their actual IA? I asked this bearing in mind that the object has been discussed in class.
I mean, I think you as a teacher can use your professional judgment. How about that? I think that I haven't had that experience at all. But if the student chose the object and chose the same prompt, and you felt that from a professional standpoint that it was not okay, then you know, that would be your call. But I think that I have not seen that happen at all. So keeping in mind that these objects here are not objects that have a real world context, in fact, to the student, except that they're on a game card. I suppose they could say it's a card that I used in a game I played in TOK, and that would be a real world context. But in most cases, they wouldn't be using those keys on that card. They could use keys, sure. Again, if they chose the same prompt and the same object that you used in class, then I think I think it would be okay for you to take issue with that. I believe the rules of the IB are that students can use the same prompt, but no students in the same class can use the same object. Now, again, if 2 students came in with keys as an object, presumably for one student it would be their car keys, and for another student it would be their mother's house keys. They are 2 different objects from my understanding.
Okay, thank you very much, Robin. There was a question that came in ahead of time from Matt that's about assessment of the IA in general, so I will read that out to you. I'm
Okay.
curious to hear about best practices for marking and standardizing IA, not AI, IA within schools, blind marking, anonymizing, marking each IA twice, etc. What practices are out there that my school might not have considered?
Okay, so not AI.
Not AI.
Best IA. Look, I think if you're the only theory of knowledge, if there's more than one theory of knowledge teacher in your school, then for sure I would, you know, do departmental moderation. And you could decide to be in touch with a partner school and do moderation for each other's schools. There tend to be samples in the IB resources that you can look at, and you can do some blind marking and then look at the commentary, the examiner's marks and commentary, and that's helpful. But there are a number, I think, on my IB that you can get to. I think that in terms of marking them twice, blind marking, stuff like that, I mean, that sounds like a good idea to me. I would say I'm a pretty slow marker, and I'm a moderator for this component, and even I would tend to mark things more than once. I think that I might look at it, and then 2 days later I might look at it again, and mark it again. But if I did have another TOK teacher in my school, I would definitely do moderation with them. So I've been reached out to in the past from schools that I have relationships with, and that's something else that you can really look into is you know, getting a partner when you go to a TOK training and doing a little moderation. So I don't know if that's helpful, but the more you mark, the better you get at doing it. That's what I think. The most important thing when you're marking is to keep reading the criteria. So this is what I would say. I've been marking for a long time, and I mark a lot of exhibitions, and every single time I read the rubric, I start at the top. You start at the top. You mark what's there. You don't mark what's not there. If it doesn't say that it has to be an original object, it doesn't. You just mark according to the rubric, and if you can do that and keep going back to the rubric, I think that's the most helpful advice I could give you.
Robin, I hope that was helpful to Matt and anybody else. So Nathan just said, just out of curiosity, has a student ever chosen their object as a card from the TOK game?
Oh, I thought, is that a different question? No, it's not happened to me, although, well, there's a Bible in the game. Students do choose the Bible, but that's not because of the game. There's an iPhone in the game. Students do choose an iPhone. But, you know, like, I'll say this, we elected to put an iPhone in the game, and we talked about it. And we said, do we want to put an iPhone in the game? Do we want to put a Bible in the game? Because we know that students use those. Before there was the game, students used those. And we decided that, yes, we did want to do that, so that they would really be able to get their head around the fact that even though it's an iPhone, it's possible to give it a real world context. And so sometimes students choose objects that are in the game, but I don't believe it's because of the game.
Have they ever chosen a game card as their object? Like just a card is the object?
Oh, no, but I love that idea. I love that idea, actually.
There you go, Nathan.
Sorry.
I think we've pretty much answered most questions. So, Robin, could you just go on to the last slide so that Jemima can do the wrap up? Because there's been a few questions about kind of follow up and recordings and that kind of thing. So I'm going to hand you over to Jemima now.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Robin. That was great. So if anyone else has any more questions or anything they'd like to know, please scan the QR code on the screen, and that will get you in touch with one of your local reps who can answer any questions regarding the game or anything else to do with the IB. Like I said at the beginning, this has been recorded, and you will be sent a copy of the recording and the slides within the next 48 hours. After the webinar, so you can go back and review it in your own time. Thank you again for everyone attending today, and I hope you found it useful, and thank you, Robin, for a wonderful webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.